Hello, folks. Welcome to another edition of the Dr. Mark Foster Show. Today I will talk about the possibility of life on the sun. This is a subject which I realize is a bit odd, but there are indications, possibly, in the Baha'i texts which indicate that that kind of life could be possible. And I would assume that if there is life on the sun, that perhaps on other stars as well. Let me begin by just addressing the subject in a very general sense. Obviously, the existence of starry life is a very speculative idea. There is, however, a quotation from an old and outdated Baha'i compilation called Abdu'l-Baha on Divine Philosophy, which does appear to describe some type of sentient or conscious creatures on various luminous stellar bodies, including the sun. The indication is that life is possible everywhere through adaptation. That would seem to relate, in a general sense, to Baha'u'llah's statement, "Know thou that every fixed star hath its own planets, and every planet its own creatures, whose number no man can compute." I will note, however, that because some of the sources used in some of the earliest Baha'i publications lack authenticated Arabic or Persian versions, in other words, autographs, they are not defined as scriptural. In addition, many of the early English language translations were relatively poor in quality. There are various reasons for that. In some cases, the translators may not have been familiar with English quite so well. In other cases, it might have been a rushed translation. For example, Abdu'l-Baha might have been giving a talk and someone might have been literally translating as the talk was going on, so there was no real care or deliberation which was made with the translation. In other cases, the translator might have introduced her or his own interpretations or ideas into the translation. Hard to say. But with those important qualifications, I decided to include a portion of a particular passage. First, however, let me make a qualification. There is, in this passage I will read, a rather odd reference to sea horses, and Abdu'l-Baha does appear to say that sea horses are half horses and half fish. He also makes a comparison between fish and sea birds. Now, when I first looked at that, it really made no sense to me, and I thought that perhaps the translator was joking, but thinking about it some more, I don't think so anymore. There is a concept in Platonic philosophy which is called ideal forms. Let me read you a brief definition of that. This is taken from the Oxford Dictionary of Philosophy by Simon Blackburn. The theory of forms is probably the most characteristic and most contested of the doctrines of Plato. Ordinarily, things gain their natures by either imitating forms, which then become thought of as transcendent and somehow independent of the sensible world, or participating in them, in which case they are immanent, present in things, and perhaps less mysterious. The train of thought is illustrated with both geometrical and ethical examples. The plate that the potter makes is not itself perfectly round, but perfect roundness is an ideal. It may not be found in the world, but it is something to which things approximate, and it plays a role in rendering intelligible the world in which they do. Similarly, actual human institutions may only approximate the ideal of justice, but the ideal or form provides an intelligible dimension of description and criticism. In other words, the concept of being a seahorse. Well, if you look at the seahorse, you look at its shape, it's shaped a bit like a horse, so it kind of resembles a horse, but by the same token, it is also a fish. So Abdu'l-Baha's statement, I think, is made more for comparison purposes. I do not think that Abdu'l-Baha has adopted the Platonic concept. Abdu'l-Baha, in my view, is not a Platonist. Nevertheless, he does use some Platonic language, as well as Aristotelian language, in his talks and tablets or writings. And I think that this particular statement needs to be looked at in that context, in my opinion. So I'll go ahead and read it. I think now it might make some more sense. The earth has its inhabitants. The water and the air contain many living beings, and all the elements have their nature spirits. Then how is it possible to conceive that these stupendous stellar bodies are not inhabited? Verily, they are peopled. But let it be known that the dwellers accord with the elements of their respective spheres. These living beings do not have states of consciousness like unto those who live on the surface of this globe. The power of adaptation and environment molds their bodies and states of consciousness just as our bodies and minds are suited to our planet. For example, we have birds that live in the air, those that live on the earth, and those that live in the sea. The seabirds are adapted to their elements, likewise the birds which soar in the air, and those which hover above the earth's surface. Many animals living on the land have their counterparts in the sea. The domestic horse has his counterpart in the seahorse, which is half horse and half fish. The components of the sun differ from those of this earth, for there are certain light and life-giving elements radiating from the sun. Exactly the same elements may exist in two bodies, but in varying quantities. Beings who inhabit those distant luminous bodies are attuned to the elements that have gone into their composition of their respective spheres. So perhaps with the description that I gave, that statement makes a bit more sense. My guess is that whatever the original text said, and I have no access to it, perhaps it would be translated these days a bit more carefully, maybe with a footnote of some sort to indicate possibly what Abdu'l-Baha was referring to. Fortunately, there are some texts, both by Abdu'l-Baha, which may deal with this subject, perhaps. On the other hand, they might be dealing with the solar system and not the sun, but possibly dealing with life on the sun. I will quote two of them. The first is from a provisional translation by Mirza Aminullah. This was done back on August 15th, 1902, and it was a tablet by Abdu'l-Baha, dated 1902, written to I.D. Brittingman. I.D. Brittingman asked Abdu'l-Baha the following question: Are the planets or stars the many mansions in heaven of which Christ spoke, telling the disciples that he went to prepare a place for them. Here was Abdu'l-Baha's response. As to thy question regarding the stars, know that these brilliant stars are numberless, and their existence is not void of wisdom, both useful and important. The existence is of great importance. Rather, they are worlds, as this world of ours, but they differ in their bodies, by their difference of elements from this earthly body. They differ in their formation. Their beings existent upon these bodies are according to their formation. As to the worlds whereunto Christ, unto whom be the great glory, referred, they are spiritual, divine, heavenly, single, unlocated. Neither the imperfect mind can comprehend them, nor the shining soul can know them. But, verily, the sights of the people of the kingdom of Al-Abha, the most glorious, perceive them, and the intellects of the people of the supreme concourse apprehend them. So he made a distinction there apparently. The first is about stars, and he does indicate that there may be life on those stars. Again, whether he's talking about the stars or the solar systems, I don't know. But then he refers to the many mansions that were referred to by Christ, and he says that no, that refers to the spiritual worlds beyond this world. In other words, the kingdom beyond, or life after death, and we in this world have no way of knowing about them, but souls in the Abha kingdom, or the world beyond, and especially in the supreme concourse, the highest levels of the next world, can become aware of them. Now, this next statement is taken from some answered questions. This was from a table talk that was delivered by Abdu'l-Baha. It cannot be imagined that the worlds of God, whether the stars or this earth, were once inhabited by the donkey, cow, mouse, and cat, and that they were without man. This supposition is false and meaningless. So again, those last two quotations I read are certainly not as specific as the first one, but they may in a somewhat indirect way support them. In addition to that, using this online website called HelioViewer, which is at helioviewer.org, and I will include a link to that below this video. This has images of the sun, official images that have been taken of the sun. Beginning at the end of last year, I began looking at this website and taking screen captures of certain select areas of these images of the sun, and I saw what to me looked like homes and towers of various sorts on the sun. I suppose it could be my imagination. Again, I will include a link to this image below the video, and also I will also include a link to the book from which I got most of this information, which is the book Unific Evolution, also directly below. Well, that's it for today. This is Mark A. Foster. Have a good one.